Let's speak to Alain Tolhurst, who's chief reporter at PoliticsHome. Morning.
Morning.
Your reaction, first of all, to Boris Johnson and the manner in which he resigned.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary, really. It's you thought a former journalist would have tried to get it in a bit earlier ahead of print deadline times. I can imagine his name was cursed in a lot of newsrooms last night, dropping that news so late as it did on a Friday night. I think the timing of it was interesting. I mean, we know that he received the report from the Privileges Committee earlier in the week, and I thought what was interesting was that there was no stories in the media from sort of friends and allies of Johnson claiming that he'd been exonerated, that it was all going to be fine, which you often kind of get from Johnson along this. There was no briefings at all, which I guess is kind of bad news. And it looks like basically he's waited until he got his honours out of the way and then decided, rather than kind of trying to fight this Privileges Committee report, instead he's decided just to jack it all in. He clearly doesn't want the ignominy of kind of facing a suspension from the Parliament, a petition, a recall petition, and potentially, a by-election and leaving Parliament that way. He's decided just to quit now rather than wait for all that process to take place.
He talked very strongly about the Privilege Committee, saying that they'd made their mind up before they started, egregious bias. He talked about it being a witch hunt and a kangaroo court. And we mustn't forget that Chris Bryant recused himself from that parliamentary committee because of statements he'd made. But we mustn't forget, Harriet Harman did say some pretty strong things about Boris Johnson before this began. I mean, she called him a proven liar. Some people will say, maybe Boris Johnson has a point here.
I think when you look at some of Harman's comments, you could maybe make that argument, but you have to remember that actually there is a Tory majority. It was a majority of Tory MPs on that committee, and there's a lot of people saying that it's to do with Brexit. It includes two of the most arch Brexiteers in Bernard Jenkin and Sir Charles Walker. And he set up the process when he was Prime Minister and approved it. So I think in that sense, it's kind of you can't really suggest that it's a witch hunt in that sense, because it's a Tory majority that has voted for this potential sanction was enough to kick him out of Parliament.
How damaging is it for the Conservative Party, not only for this to be all played out in public and Boris Johnson being so overtly critical of Rishi Sunak, but also the fact now the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, has to face the prospect of 2 by-elections?
Yeah, and of course, that was the big row over Johnson's resignation honours list as well, was that he wanted to nominate, we believe, 4 sitting MPs, including Nadine, Dorries. And there was a lot of row over whether that was going to, A, whether it's sort of constitutional for MPs to be offered peerages before they've stood down, or B, whether, it was going to cause these by-elections, which would be a massive headache for Sunak. The fact is that obviously Nadine Dorries has decided that she's going to go anyway. I think her seat in mid-beds is probably a bit more safe. It's a bit more, she's got a pretty large majority. But certainly Uxbridge was a massive Labour target anyway. They've already got their candidate in place and have been campaigning, whereas the Tories are now scrabbling around. They sent out an email last night looking for candidates to apply. So it's going to be very difficult and very damaging, to lose. If you keep losing these sort of mid Parliament by-elections, it doesn't look good for your future prospects, essentially. And if they were to lose mid-beds, then I think that would show that the tide is really going out on the Conservative Party. It would be very difficult for them to hold on to even seats that look pretty safe at a general election.
We must talk about the honours list, because that's in some ways almost got lost after Boris
Indeed.
Johnson's resignation. But I mean, there's Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Michael Fabricant, not to mention the allies within Downing Street, many of whom were blamed for some of these Downing Street parties all being honoured.
Yep, absolutely. Lots of people who worked in his press team, who worked as special advisors in Number 10, who were implicated, who we know were at some of these parties. They were then, some of them were named in the Sue Gray report, and they've kind of walked away with CVEs and OBEs, and in the most interesting that people often say that it's a sign of getting old when MPs are younger than you, or policemen are getting younger than you. I'm getting to the stage now where there are now peers, members of the House of Lords, who are younger than me, after he nominated Ross Kempsell and Charlotte Owen, who both of whom I think about 30 or 31 to the House of Lords, which is a frankly extraordinary thing to do. So yeah, I think that has been kind of lost, and I think that list actually was a lot cut down from where it originally was. But I do think that when we wake up on Monday morning and start realising we have to say Sir Michael Fabricant and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dame Priti Patel, then I think it'll start to sort of sink in, quite how interesting that list is in terms of the people that he's decided to honour.
Thank you so much for watching. You get extra points for making it all the way to the end of the video.
And if you want to see more from me, Chloe and Callum, you can join us every Friday to Sunday on Times Radio from 6 a.m.